Have you ever heard of the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk? If you have an interest in classic beachside amusement parks, then chances are you might have, especially given that it is the oldest surviving park in California. Or if you've lived in the Bay Area or central region of California, you might have heard this at some point in your life.
At the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, in the warm California sun. Boardwalk!
If you ever have visited the boardwalk, no matter what year you went, you probably have a pretty good idea of what's there. A Ferris wheel, a carousel, the classic 101-year-old wooden coaster, the Giant Dipper, and of course, various other flat rides scattered along the boardwalk. You might also remember the Haunted Castle Dark Ride. If you've been to the boardwalk in the last 16 years, then the image of the castle's looming turrets, large flashing windows, gargoyles, and creepy skeleton holding the ride sign probably stand out. However, not many people are aware of just how far back this ride's history goes. So come with me as we travel to 1907, 25 years before the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk's first ever dark ride opened, and look at how the Haunted Castle has evolved to reflect its cultural environment. This beloved amusement park rose like a phoenix from the ashes 9 months after the Neptune Casino burnt to the ground in 1906. The casino would quickly be rebuilt and still remains a signature location on the boardwalk to this day, albeit more so in the form of indoor mini-golf and an arcade. However, it was through this restoration that the boardwalk began its expansion into the park that it is today. In 1908, a 4-lane bowling alley would be erected in the very spot where future dark rides would later reside for the next 94 years. In the meantime, big changes were starting to occur, with the Louvre Carousel opening in 1911 and the completion of the Giant Dipper in 1924. It was only a matter of time before the boardwalk would set its sight on creating another iconic, long-lasting attraction. 1921 saw the arrival of Ed Riker, or rather, saw the start of his influence on the boardwalk. Riker had prior experience running a game concession across the country in Coney Island when he was 15, and in 1918, he played a central role in introducing skee-ball to Santa Cruz. So as an experienced concessionaire of amusement parks and entertainment, he quickly became quite involved with the boardwalk's managers, and a decade later, he was put in charge of transforming the bowling alley into the boardwalk's first ever dark ride. Dante's Inferno opened in 1932. There is unfortunately little to no information on the ride's layout or how the interior looked. However, there is thankfully one picture of the exterior that gives us at least some idea of what the ride possibly could have looked like. The ride had a large scene depicting what appears to be the devil, a demon, and perhaps either another demon or Dante himself. The backdrop also features 2 paintings of flying demons that appear to be rapidly approaching. In the picture, the Dante's part of the ride sign is partially in frame. Now, given that the ride's picture is in black and white, it's hard to determine what exactly the surrounding scenery is meant to be. Just based on their texture and the jagged appearance, they look like they could be rocks in a cave. However, given the nature of the ride, it is also very likely that they could represent flames. The only interior decoration that we're able to see in this picture is a ride sign reading, "Doorway to Hell," visible through the ride's open door. Unfortunately, Dante's Inferno would only remain at the boardwalk for a year, before being rethemed to Laughland in 1933. It is described to have maniacal clowns, and while it was sad to see Dante's Inferno go, Laughland was certainly a much better fit for the park, as it sometimes would even outgross the Giant Dipper. The dark ride would remain as Laughland for an undetermined amount of time, later switching to Treasure Island, then around the 50s it became Pirates Cove, and then later Haunted House. Despite Riker's unique vision and knack for creating well-loved dark rides, the Seaside Company eventually took over his dark ride in 1935, along with the majority of other rides at the boardwalk over the years. And so, any subsequent rethemes were not under Riker's creative control. In 1973, the first form of the Haunted Castle officially opened its doors to the public. Like its predecessors, it mostly relied on cheap gags and jump scares, which, while entertaining, made it unsophisticated in comparison to other dark rides of the time. While Santa Cruz was in no way competing financially with parks like Disney, people had come to expect higher quality rides, whether that be in the ride's story, design, or even technology. The more outdated the ride, the harder it became for riders to immerse themselves. In order to combat this, in 1979, the boardwalk decided to have its first major renovation of the Haunted Castle, and they managed to get Academy Award-winning Maurice Ayers to help refurbish it. He implemented quick, scary, and funny gags that would confuse riders and make them more likely to re-ride it. The ride would open in 1980 and would later be placed in creative control of John Fensel, who would give the exterior its iconic castle appearance in 1989. While there isn't much information available on the ride's exact layout, there are still some videos and images online that give us some sort of idea of what was included there. In 2006, the boardwalk had already begun to plan a large refurbishment of the castle, with R&R Creative Amusement Design in charge of the creative direction, Sally Corporation behind the animatronic figures, and the IE Park Company of Italy constructing new double-seat cars, the new haunted castle was all set up to begin construction. The building was completely torn down, and the ground below was dug up to make room for a new 10,000 square foot basement for the dark ride. The new dark ride had a very thorough layout. Starting in the loading bay, guests would board their car before the vehicles rotated backwards. That's right, they used to rotate backwards, which unfortunately they have stopped doing in recent years for unknown reasons. The backwards vehicle would then descend a spiraling ramp while skeleton ghosts from above moved down towards the riders. Riders would then proceed past the entry hall and into the dungeon, where they would encounter a guard who would then warn them of their doom before his head turned into a skeleton using the Pepper's Ghost effect. Riders would then be brought through the wine cellar, where they would encounter various animatronics, like a skeleton pouring out a seamlessly ending amount of wine, a floating bottle, and heads that popped out of barrels. The vehicle would then take riders to the castle's kitchen, where the chef would show them his main ingredient for the soup of the day: rat. They'd then pass a quick jump scare with a man covered in spiders before making their way through the dining hall. A haunted bust of the king at the end of the dining hall would taunt the riders before sending them into a gigantic fireplace. The room has a nice and toasty heating effect, which is especially nice on a cold day. It also had two demons, which perhaps might be a callback to Dante's Inferno. The vehicle will then push past the slammed doors, and riders would find themselves in a swamp, where they were met with a hungry crocodile. There are various jump scares in this area, with the jumping spider, a swamp creature, and a plant creature. Riders would then enter a graveyard, with a humorous scene of zombies burying a man in a Santa Cruz shirt. Now at the end of the ride, the vehicles pass through a hall that shoots air at riders, mimicking blow darts. Before starting their ascent to the top of the ride, they see two final animatronics: a skeleton with a detached head that typically says a funny line, and the executioner, who holds the rope to the guillotine that is positioned just above the final doors. As the car pushes past the doors, the guillotine drops and a loud pre-recorded scream plays. Upon its opening, the new haunted castle received positive reviews from parkgoers, the only major complaint being that the ride just wasn't scary enough. The previous version hadn't held back with fake blood and disturbing imagery, while the new one was definitely toned down. But how has this dark ride managed to remain at the boardwalk, and what does it even offer guests by being scary? Well, it might have a little something to do with the three main themes of popular dark rides: storytelling, immersion, and emotional connection. Upon looking back at the dark ride's history, it clearly fulfills each of these categories to a varying degree, the weakest of which being storytelling. While it's clear you're in a scary castle, the haunted castle never really explains why it is that you're there in the first place. You're more so just meandering through while things sort of attack you. However, what it lacks for in storytelling, it more than makes up for in its immersion. The typical pop and 80s rock they play is overpowered by the ride's creepy soundtrack by Midnight Syndicate. This presence is only strengthened by the queue line, as you see a skeleton pop its head up from a window and a chain door rattles as you wait to board. The only really immersion-breaking element being the visible safety exit signs for obvious reasons. However, I would argue the ride's emotional connection is its strongest element. Historically, dark rides, especially for parks without any kind of IP, tend to have scarier themes. They cannot rely on people to already have an emotional connection to any of their characters in their rides, unlike a place like Disney, where people are already very familiar with characters like Peter Pan and Winnie the Pooh. Fear is one of the strongest emotions. It brings riders more surprise and leaves them thinking for an extended period of time about what it was about the ride that frightened them so much. Anyone of any age can get scared. But not only does it evoke fear from its riders, given its long history, it also evokes a sense of nostalgia. The Haunted Castle theme for the dark ride has now been around at the boardwalk for over 50 years. It is a ride that parents have taken their children on because their parents took them, and so on. The boardwalk doesn't need a Peter Pan or Winnie the Pooh because the ride itself is an important figure to parkgoers. Joel Zika describes it as, the darkness or spooky quality of these rides is not necessarily the most important, but it has become their legacy. The fear and the memory go hand in hand to create an enjoyable ride experience for guests, and it is because of this that rides like the Haunted Castle are able to both remain a popular and beloved attraction, while also being allowed to repeatedly change its form to better suit its evolving cultural environment. My hope is that they will continue to add new animatronics and elements to the ride, and hopefully even re-implement the rotating effect. But who's to say for certain what the future holds for the Haunted Castle? They could decide to retheme it again, or it could remain the same for another 20 years. Either way, it doesn't seem like the boardwalk is planning on getting rid of their signature dark ride anytime soon. Please let me know in the comments if you've been on the Haunted Castle and what you think about it. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.